Kia ora, everyone. Welcome to episode 20. My parents bought me a blanket for my birthday. I'm just going to show it off. It's very nice. It's very turquoise. And it's very warm. And I do not intend to be rained on today. So we'll just wait a couple minutes to let people join up, and then we'll get started. Okay, so I think we can get started. Hello, everyone. It is really nice to see you all again. It has been a while. The reason why we've been having a little bit of a break is obviously with the reintroduction of lockdown, a lot of things got shifted out. In the last few weeks, we have been preparing and carrying out Throppy, which is the North Island Development Tournament, North Island Novice Championship, won by the fantastic team that I mentored. So we're really, really stoked. And also congratulations to the two new Auckland members of the New Zealand judging pool who were accredited at that tournament. What we're going to be chatting about today is trialing, how to maximize the trialing process, how to make sure that you approach it in a calm way that allows you to achieve well. And of course, as usual, if you have any questions, please flick through messages. And a reminder once again that we have our clubs nights after this. So just sign up. It'll be online today for the last week before we head back to being able to go to university again in person. Which starts next week. So please do come along if you are keen. And as usual, please just leave a message in the comments if you have any questions about how to maximize your trial processes, because obviously trialing is quite a tension point in many of your debating careers, and you want to make sure you're putting the best foot forward. So what I'm firstly going to do is just give you a little run through, and this is probably a little bit more useful if you're a university administrator in terms of setting up trials and running trials and having selections. Talk you through the different types of trials and the ways in which different societies, different circuits may differ in the way they trial for teams. And traditionally, teams are trialed for majors. So for example, in New Zealand, well, at the University of Auckland, we would trial for our Officers' Cup, our Joint Scroll, Worlds, and Australs, and then potentially if there is sufficient interest or we're looking to put together particularly competitive teams, we'll also do it for the women's tournaments and for example, Throppy. So a lot of trials happen and a lot of actually your best practice will come from doing trials and making sure that you're taking part because it is a unique opportunity to do a lot of debates in a row where you're shifting between different teammates, you're trying out new things. It's a little bit more tense than other things, so people are putting in their best. So it's a phenomenal training tool, not just a tool by which we can sort people out for picking the best speakers for tournaments. And obviously, if you are heading to USUDC or ABP over the next couple of weekends, you probably will have engaged in a trial process by which you were sorted into your particular teams. So in New Zealand, there's a very simple trial process. You arrive. Selectors make you do debates in various combinations, and then the selectors tell you what teams you are in. There is a veto system if and only if there is significant reasons why you cannot debate in a team with someone. Otherwise, you kind of just have to suck it up. If you put in a team with someone who you don't get on enormously well on, but with whom you can debate, you just have to do it. And while there are some leeway, some societies allow you to enter preferences that allow you to indicate to the selectors who you would or wouldn't want to be with. These are by and large not hugely determinative in forming your teams. Other campuses put a much higher stock in the choices of speakers. So essentially saying the preferences of speakers matter enormously as to team formation. Some very literally, something like captain's choice is a style used by some Australian universities, where the top-ranked speaker is allowed to pick their teammates, and then the top-ranked speaker who then has not been picked yet is allowed to pick their teammates. Sometimes teams will be entirely constructed coming into trials. That happens through a process of arbitrage with people approaching others, trying to game out how well they're going to do in trials. And if you are not able to get yourself into one of these pairings, sometimes you can be pushed entirely out of a squad or pushed into a team that is significantly worse than the team that you otherwise potentially deserved. One of the most ordinary justifications put forward is that team chemistry is just as important to teams doing well as the quality of the speakers. This is a argument, but I'm going to put forward, and it'll be the only time you'll get significant New Zealand bias ever on this episode, as to why that potentially shouldn't be something that you aim for, is two reasons. Firstly, one of the reasons why people, I think, don't debate as well with people that they don't maybe like or that aren't their friends or don't suit their idea of what they wanted coming into the tournaments is because there isn't a strong expectation on them. They're not pressured to be better teammates through a process that frequently will allocate them with people who aren't necessarily their best friends or people who they get on with. And learning how to be a good teammate, learning how to develop your ability to debate across a broad range of people, learning how to deal with the types of things that come up when you're not really good friends with someone who you're a team with, are quite a natural learning experience. So I think one of the amazing things about the New Zealand system is that it has pushed me to debate with people who I otherwise would never have debated with. Sometimes it's worked quite poorly, haven't been particularly successful teams, but many times I was enormously surprised about the way that it pushed me to become a better teammate, and those teams ended up being just as successful as teams that I would have decided going into the trials. The second is that debating shouldn't necessarily be a popularity contest. Obviously, some people can be particularly awful. If you are someone who is really alienating your teammates or not being nice, don't do that. People won't want to debate with you and your teams will do poorly. But most of the time, what ends up happening is you get clicks, and clicks are something that are unpleasant. It can be extremely frightening coming into a scenario where you don't think you're particularly popular and are unsure whether anyone's going to allow you to be in their teams or look at you in a way that you might feel is demeaning. And I think this is incredibly sad. I think that having open trial processes that aren't a popularity contest and aren't entirely formed by discussions that happen outside of the trials is something that is very healthy for squad culture. And it is also important to foster a tradition of humility within your institutions, where older debaters need to perform at trials rather than using their name recognition to generate a good team for them and vetoing everyone else. So that's my 2 cents on trials processes. I would encourage you to approach it just in the way that sports teams approach things, that interviews approach things. In where we're looking for the best people and there's an expectation of professionalism on you, that you find ways to work with people who may not have been your top pick going into a trials process. So you are sitting down to go to a trial. What are the types of things that you should be doing to prepare for the trials process and prepare for what honestly is likely to be a slightly unpleasant experience? So the first thing to do is make sure that you are familiar with the format that you are going to be debating in. And if you are a younger member, if you're a novice member, encourage your society to do a couple of trials in that format. Say, for example, you are going to do an Officers' Cup trial, as we are doing at the University of Auckland this week with the New Zealand Impromptu Cup style, Officers' Cup Impromptu style. And if you look at the episode that we did a couple of weeks ago, episode 19, that was a full explanation of the style. You get 5 minutes of preparation, 2 speakers. It's very fast, very punchy, a lot of fun. Encouraging your society to have a few rounds of that just to allow you as someone who's never done them before, or someone who wishes just to brush off the rust with the different styles, to ease yourself back in. So make sure that you do a couple of debates in that style so you have a full understanding and you're not quite just learning on the fly. Officers' Cup was the very first thing I trialed for at university. I did not make it into a team. Initially, I eventually got bumped up by being a reserve, and that was because the trials happened when I've never ever done Officers' Cup before, and it happened very early in the year. And so I think it's important to make sure that you just do a couple of debates in that format before you're able to get in. It is not necessary to overload yourself with content. That can be something that actually drags you down if you're spending all of your time desperately trying to cram things into your head. I don't think debating is an activity you can particularly cram for. Just doing the same things that we've talked about many times on these episodes, stuff like making sure that your media diet is like healthy and good and you're getting lots of information. Maybe in the week before a trial, having a general look over current affairs, because sometimes your selectors will be selecting motions at the last minute and we'll be looking to things that have happened in the last week, just making sure you're keeping abreast of that. Those are all good things you can do, but by and large, the content that you will be able to turn out is stuff that happens, you will have gested long before the trial. So making sure that you've got a generally healthy media diet at all stages of your university career is something that is generally important. Third thing, making sure that you're in the appropriate mental headspace. And part of this is making sure that you are cultivating just like good mentors, people you can chat to, especially people who have gone through the trials process before, and know that if you do get stressed, finding a buddy who is also trialing that you can go and sit down with, especially if you're someone who's new, can be something that's incredibly helpful, just to make sure that you're calming out the nerves. Because realistically, your nerves will not, I repeat, not be affecting the way you debate. A lot of the time, people are able to produce relatively consistent performances despite their nerves, but they feel like they're performing significantly below what they feel capable of. So if you have a buddy, if you're reminding yourself that your nerves are something that'll make the debating process unpleasant, but won't throw you off unless they really start overpowering you, it is something that's good to keep in mind and can help you just rebalance yourself if you're feeling going into the trials like it is something that is going to be particularly overwhelming. On the day of trials, what I advise you do is just have a very chill morning. Make sure you're not trying to cram in any new information. Sometimes I like giving a practice speech. This is not about learning anything. It's just about getting the motors going. Do not, and I repeat, do not do like 50 practice speeches before the trials. Just exhaust yourself, you key yourself up. It's important to just be calm and flexible coming into it. So maybe doing one speech in the morning max. Most of the time I don't even do one speech. I might do like a 30-second like vocal warm up, make a couple of points that I've made before from a debate. And simply what that is about is just about making sure that things are moving. You don't have to do a huge warm-up. And then when I tend to like to walk there just so you can get some exercise, make sure that you're not just coming in straight out of bed to the trials, because I think sometimes that can not having that physical activation can leave you a little bit behind. Means that you can also start warming up your mind. So maybe I'll listen to a podcast, maybe I'll think about things, or maybe I'll chat with someone on the phone. Once again, not about cramming things in, just making sure that things are working and things are operating in a way that is healthy. And then when you arrive, chat to people. Make sure that you are keeping light, keeping happy, because I think those are things that actually may have a determinative impact when you get to those trials, and also put you in the mood to be collaborative, because I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make going into trials is they become particularly closed off. They want to prove themselves individually or push particularly individually, and that can actually put you in a mindset that hinders your debating. So if you go and if you're calm, find other people who are nervous, have a chat. Those are all good things that you can do to make sure that you are starting off your trial process on the best foot. So let's have a little check for questions. Boop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doop. No questions at this point. Let's push on. So what I mentioned, and I think this is particularly important, is there's a constant tension when you're at trials, because you're obviously wanting to perform your individually best, but debating is also a team activity, and so it can be a little interesting to shift between teams in a way that's complex. And I will just put this out there. I am someone who I think warms up to teams. I really like getting in a groove with my teammate, figuring out the things that work well with them, and trials really disorient me. I feel bounced between speakers. I'm constantly having to adjust my techniques to make sure I'm matching with different people. So the mindset that I think is most appropriate for trials is it is an artificial activity. So don't do enormous amounts of things that are solely designed to help boost the other person, but you need to make sure that you are maintaining a collaborative mindset, because if you don't maintain that collaborative mindset, that leaves you a worse debater. You're unable to latch into the good things about the other person's speech. You're unable to demonstrate the attributes that will make you good as a speaker. And often what I think is one of the most impressive things that comes particularly from later speakers in the debate is their ability to make their earlier speakers look good and do that explicitly. So when you are speaking second or third within a trial, and you suddenly have this instinct of being like, no, I need to help myself look good, not the person who is speaking before me, you are actually hindering yourself. You are not demonstrating your ability as a third speaker. So I actually amp it up a little bit. I make sure that I am very obviously to the selector, making sure that I'm boosting my teammates' material. I'm explaining why this was an excellent point coming from my first speaker. Here are the things that I'm adding to it, being very clear about what I'm adding. And these are all things I do in ordinary debates. That is generally the best tactic while you are speaking. And equally, remember, if you are a first speaker, you are judged by the foundation you set for other speakers within the debate. So you want to make sure that they really understand the material during prep, they feel well supported, and then of course you just do your best to make sure that you set that clean potential. Selectors notice when teams have a disjunct or they have a disconnect. That means that the speakers aren't appropriately supporting each other, and that worsens both of their performances. So hopefully in this prisoner's dilemma, you feel like it is now important to make sure that you're collaborating. And obviously, you're not trying to do everything to help them. Sometimes I get a little bit silent after I speak, because you've given your speech, you've shown to the selectors what you're capable of doing. So it's not entirely the same as being a teammate. You don't just want to be doing the unnoticed work constantly, but remaining a collaborative mindset, trying to gel with your teammate is often what is most important to yourself performing as an individual. Part of that collaborative mindset is also just keeping chill. It is important not to get too keyed up or too aggressive when you are debating, because what happens, particularly in the trial context, is that can be a little bit difficult to really stick the landing on, because often when you speak hyper aggressively or you run things that are quite inventive, you do that with the expectation that your teammates are really going to be there to support you. You're really going to be there to jive in with that ideas. I run real knife edge cases when I debate, and I rely on my teammates quite heavily to make sure that things keep on track. If you are pushing the balance a little bit too much, it is much easier for you to veer off to one end than it is to keep performing appropriately. So attempting to try and keep like an 80% energy, 80% creativity, 80% aggression than you would do if you were going to a particular tournament, I think is the correct balance to try and make. Otherwise, you run the risk of things going catastrophically bad, or your team careening into material that you actually would require a very strong team perspective to make sure that it can operate effectively. And I think this is also true. If your teammates aren't understanding the points that you're breaking, or doing things that are a bit too advanced, make sure you are just doing the basics well. Judges really look for the basics and making sure that teams are performing the stuff that they know they can do before necessarily trying to push things so far. And even if your teammates are train wrecks, if you are performing the basics well, that will be the selector's memories going out of it. Okay, anyone have any questions? Okay, last few things to discuss. I think the major last thing I'm going to discuss is a little bit during trials, but particularly after trials. And that's how you cope with difficulties when you don't make a team you necessarily want to make, or you haven't made a team that's as good as you think the one you deserve is. some people will maybe get into a rut and think that they are not good trialists. And this was me for the first 3 or 4 years of my debating, well, maybe longer than the first 3 or 4 years of my debating career, where I would consistently trial worse than I would perform at tournaments. And I think sometimes for me, the major problem was that jumping around between teammates. Diving, I found it really jarring and discombobulating. I tried to hold things a little bit too aggressively, and it meant that I wasn't flexible with the teammates I was having. And also, I lent too much into the trying to make it into a team rather than recognizing that it is a little bit artificial. And while I need to be friendly and collaborative, there's definitely, you can push that a little bit too far and fail to recognize that what you need to do is show to the judges what you are capable of doing, what you can add, and making sure you can keep that perspective. But if you are convincing yourself that you are a bad trialist and you are struggling to really reconcile yourself with the fact that you have done poorly, I think my message would be, maybe you could consider it a little bit harsh, but you kind of just need to toughen up. I think sometimes in debating, there's a real lack of humility, and being humble, being collaborative, being flexible are among the hallmarks of excellent debaters. People who are able, no matter the team that they go into, to make their teammates better. And if you are not doing that effectively, you are never going to be able to be like a top-level debater, because you're always going to create friction within your teams. I think that my experiences in the lower teams that I ended up getting into were incredibly healthy in terms of going forward. You have years of your debating career. It's not an all or nothing thing now. So making sure that you are building those basic team level skills, helps you in trials when you get older, but will also just make you a better debater in general. Make sure that you go and talk to the different selectors all about their different perspectives, not just about how you can perform well as a team, but ways in which you can present yourself better within the particular trials. Starting to generate those habits from the moment that trials happen, then through to the tournament, keeping all the notes of the different feedback that you've been given. These are the types of habits that set apart good debaters and great debaters. So yeah, use it as an opportunity to develop the type of discipline that is necessary for high-level debating. And if you are able to carry that forward, you will have been left better from like not performing well. And it might feel like a little bit of a cop-out answer, just get better at debating. That's how you avoid disasters in trials. But keeping to boost that, I think, is and keeping that growth mindset is important going forward. We have some questions. First, how do you bounce back if you have a real bad first round? I have had disastrous first rounds, particularly because when I was younger, I was incapable of speaking third. And while I have discovered that I actually do like third, Australs went very well as a third speaker, I was, earlier than that, entirely useless. And I remember having to do a debate about wealth taxes where I was a third speaker, where I was entirely unable to synthesize the debate. I just lost the plot, crashed and burned. And luckily what happened is they were like, it's a one-off. I think that is the major thing to remember when you are trialing, is that there are several rounds, and I think adjudicators and selectors basically do a cognitive thing where they reduce both your best round and your worst round basically to the average. They cut out those types of outliers. They are cognizant of the fact that people have disaster rounds, or they're forced to do something new, or they don't jive with a particular teammate. And so if you remember to keep the one bad round that you do, regardless of whether it's the first round, the second round, or the last round, remember that the selectors will keep that in context. It's something that is very, very helpful in terms of making sure that you bounce back. The second thing that I would say is that making sure that it doesn't affect the rest of your trials isn't just in terms of the cognitive recognizing that it is only one round, it'll likely be cut out as an outlier. It's also about ensuring that you keep the collaborative attitude going forward, because there's a huge incentive to become unhelpful selfish when you are doing poorly. You're like, I need to claw back credibility. I need to be the best speaker in a particular debate, which leads you to push a little bit too far, to run points a little bit too risky, to not really engage with your teammates and making sure that they are doing well. This is as I mentioned when we were talking about the balance you find between selfishness and helpfulness, it is important to recognize where being helpful to other speakers is a good reflection on you, is something that is helpful to you. If you are a third speaker, it is your job to make sure that earlier speakers look good. Selectors will be looking for that. If you are first speaker, running a case that it's clear your other speakers understand and are able to develop on is something that you will be judged on. Remembering to keep that helpfulness going is important, and not making sure that you're backsliding into being particularly desperate or selfish. Because also remember, selectors are looking for your temperament. They're asking themselves, how is this person going to perform in the last round, where it's make or break, or break and... See, the problem with this expression in debating is that breaking is a good thing. So it's not quite make or break. It's break or don't break. In the break or don't break situations, are they going to be able to just calm themselves sufficiently to give their best performances? And when your back is against the wall, that is the moment when you start doing that well. Cool. Any other questions? Sorry, I have my tutor voice on. I'm going to take a little moment, and if you have any questions, please flick them into the video. Having a few practice debates. I am participating in a practice debate tonight, not a practice debate for Officers' Cup, which I'm trialing for on Sunday, but a practice debate for someone who's doing US UDC. It's very exciting. When you speak with someone who is much better than you, which will happen at some point in the trials process, really use that opportunity. They might be uncooperative. Ask them lots of questions. Push them to share their strategies with you. Try and tether yourself to that going up, because I think it's important for the general ascent if you're able to show that you are capable of rising to the level of your teammates. Question, how should you approach prep? Excellent question. So I always make sure that I have, I always do my silent prep first. Making sure, just like you would in any other debate, you have your comparative really sorted or your framework really sorted, because without those, the debate can really crash and you can entirely endanger your position. Making sure you do those basics well is particularly important. The second thing I focus on is not fleshing out the details as much as I would in an ordinary prep, like for a trial, because sometimes you're wanting to be adding nuances or demonstrate that you were the one who brought those particular nuances, but making sure that the team's strategy is incredibly clear. Because if you are unable to bind people to your particular vision of the strategy, your additions to the debate are going to be left worse off. And this is, once again, the constant discussion we have about the balance between selfishness and helpfulness. Debating is a team activity, even in the artificial constraints of a trial. So making sure that you're doing the team things particularly well is just as important as making sure you do the individual things well, even if your strategy is a little bit different, because you are being judged particularly strongly as an individual rather than being judged just as a team. Make sure at the end of your prep that everyone understands the basics, and then the rest of your prep can just be devoted to being like, how can I allow my individual parts to shine? What are the things that I'm going to be adding in a way that is going to be impressive to the adjudicators? Question from Rob. Not sure how you do it in New Zealand, but do you have adjudicator trials, and do you have any tips for how to do those well? Excellent question. We do not have adjudicator trials specifically in New Zealand, because we have obviously the accreditation system, or we're going to BP trials that don't have an enormous amount of pressure on them. Sometimes for a tournament like Worlds, and maybe sometimes for a tournament like Australs, but less Australs than Worlds, obviously because we're sending smaller squads, we will have a particular trial. And I think the key there is just to adjudicate as simply as possible and as clearly as possible, so you're not leaving anything to things stakes, but not doing an enormous adjudication that takes heaps of time. Essentially doing the same thing that you would always do. Because remember, I think what's important here is when you're an adjudicator, that is an individual activity. So there's no weird balance you have to make between how much do I help my team, how much do I help individuals. Really just show you're capable of doing good adjudications. Always make sure that you answer the why questions. So when you've set out your particular clashes, you are able in one sentence to explain why you found one way or the other. You have your little roadmap of here are the 3 things that were necessary to win this debate. I think they proved this. These 2 things, not this, which narrowed the margin. So making sure you have those roadmaps very clear. Those are the things that are important to demonstrating that you're able to do things well. And also just making sure you listen as much as possible. It's very easy to get distracted in normal debates. Don't get distracted in adjudicated trials. Really make sure that you focus, take good notes, but really just do things the way that you otherwise would. Trainee trials is the big one that happens in New Zealand, because often we'll have space for 4 trainees, but 10 people want to be trainees. Ways in which you prepare for that. Firstly, go and watch my judging seminar. A little bit tongue-in-cheek, but talking to the older members of your society about the things that they look for in a good judge is quite important, because different societies judge slightly differently. Different selectors look for different things. So making sure that you have good connections with what is typified as the good adjudicator within your particular circuit and within your particular campus is a very useful skill. And then emulating those when you do your adjudication, knowing what your selector likes and doesn't like, those are things that can boost you a little bit. Second thing to note is I think being honest about what you are capable of doing and what you're not capable of doing within trainee trials is quite important. If you, for example, don't feel comfortable, and this is especially true for BP, if you don't feel comfortable 100% leaning one way or 100% leaning another way, explain to the selectors where the ambiguity is, in the same way you would if you had, say, a panel in BP, and explain which way you're leaning. Because obviously at the end of a BP debate, you don't have to 100% call one way or the other until they come to the vote. There's generally going to be a discussion. So if you, I think generally come down like quite firmly. So say I have a strong preference for this, but articulating where potential reasonable disagreement is entirely fair. I think it's incredibly impressive if an adjudicator is able to say there are 2 possible ways of seeing this clash. It depends on how much you weight this particular thing. And then going on to explain which one is more persuasive to them, and how they would try and convince people who may have the alternative opinion, rather than saying there's only one single right way to do this, because if, of course, the selectors disagree, that is something that can harm your overall ability going forward. So being honest about how certain you are about particular outcomes, what you think the different possible interpretations are, and why you believe the particular direction you believe, those are all things that can set you apart in a judge trial or a trainee trial. Very good question. Thank you very much. What is my morning trial ritual? Already walked through it a little bit. I make sure that I always get a little bit of exercise. So just like walking to it, making sure I'm not cramming too much, but keeping like a little bit, like making sure you're doing things that at least get your brain going, making sure that you chat to people when you arrive, making sure that you have plenty of liquids and you bring food. It's very easy to get hungry, or you might not get enough time to really go out and get food. All things that are particularly important, but realistically just do the things that gets you in the right mental headspace to go and do that trial. And it'll differ for different people, but I think, yeah, listening to hype songs is always a helpful one, but not too hype, because obviously you don't want to be overdoing it. Give you another moment to come up with questions. I think this actually raises an interesting parallel discussion of how to do adjudicator tests well, like the ones many of us have just submitted for the Asia British Parliamentary Championships that is starting this weekend, that we still don't have the result for, because apparently some IAs are being very slow in submitting, so they're not going to release that for a little bit. And what you want to do is just making sure that, once again, you're explaining possible interpretations and you're making the best argument for why you think your one is the one that should go forward, but making it clear that different potential ways of viewing it are available. What is my favorite hype song? So when I went to Thruffy in my first year, my like classic is the DJ Khaled "All You Do Is Win." We would play that in the car every single time we went to the debating room, and it put me in a great headspace. I felt very loved and included and supported. So yeah, that one was really great. I actually have a whole playlist of Pump Up music, so I'll get it out and I'll give you some of the highlights. I'm a big Kendrick Lamar fan. I picked that up from another good Auckland debater who used to listen to Kendrick Lamar a little bit obsessively before tournaments. Lean On by Major Lazer. I listen to Le Stromae, who is a Belgian singer who's great. I listen to like a lot of girl pop, like Charlie XCX's "I Love It." Just very much puts you in the correct headspace for a trial. I don't have stuff that's too angry or aggressive, because remember, the competition you're doing is in many ways a competition to see who can charm the frosty co-trialists into giving you nice bits of information. So I like to keep positive. I listen to Amy Winehouse because Amy Winehouse is great, regardless of whether it's a go-to. Stands of New Zealand music, 660 and Drax Project. All of you international people listening in, 660 and Drax Project, both good in the zone music. It's long. Cardi B. Cardi B is excellent hype music. I haven't updated this in a bit, so it's not the songs that people think would be in there. Songs in different languages. Get your brain going. It's a beautiful afternoon here in Auckland. And once again, reminder, we have club night after this. So that'll be lots of fun. Okay, any last questions? We're wrapping up to around the time when we'd normally be signing off. So flicking your questions, I'll give you another 2 minutes. I'll take in the beautiful surroundings and the bird noises. And the summer vibes that are slowly coming back to Auckland. Auckland summer this year is going to be gorgeous. I've got like 3 months between ending university, handing in my dissertation, and starting work in January. And so I'm going to just like road trip, and I'm going to go to beach volleyball tournaments, and I'm going to do ocean swims, and I'm going to really live my like best summer life. I'm going to go visit the Kaitaia Fire Farms up north. It's a Māori-owned company, really nice. They make the best hot sauce potentially in the world, and I'm going to go visit, and I'm going to get them to feed me their chilies. They seem really nice. They have a blog post on their company. It's called Kaitaia Fire, by the way. They have a blog post where they describe going to a hot sauce convention in the US and people just plying them with huge amounts of cannabis, which I think is very funny to be on a corporate website. Not that I support illegal drug consumption. Any final questions? Speaking of debates, wasn't the New Zealand leaders debate so much better than the US presidential debate? Someone's singing back there. Okay, if that's all your questions, I will sign off. I hope you have a gorgeous evening, and I hope you come along to Clubs Night tonight.